founder of the Center for Journalism and Democracy at Howard University. Phew, that was a lot. I remember when you first published this, before the book came out, you and I talked in this building, and it was really remarkable and interesting, but I don't think any of us were thinking this is how it was going to unfold.
God, no. It's been 5 years, which seems at once a long period of time, a short period of time. But when you think of everything that's happened since we had our first conversation, it really is remarkable. The way that government is using state power to try to mandate our ignorance, even as we see the effects of this history playing out in our society every day.
And I left a lot of stuff out of that story, including stuff that happened to you. But I think it's important to point out that you don't play, nor do you think you're a victim of this whole thing. In fact, when we spoke a few months ago, I want to just read, I want to play back actually what you said to me about this. Let's listen to this.
No one is more surprised at what both 1619 has become symbolically and what I've become symbolically. This was just a work of journalism to me, and I hope people would read it, but I certainly didn't think it would kind of spawn this backlash that we've seen. All of these anti-critical race theory laws, they began as anti-1619 project laws, and it's really become this cultural phenomenon. But I guess that speaks to why we became journalists, understanding the type of impact and power that we can have around the idea of narrative and how we see our society.
And that's the point of the exercise, right? You did actually provoke a discussion. So now what happens? You poked the bear. There was some dry tinder there, and you lit it. Now what happens?
Yeah, I think it's clear that you don't see a project facing this type of backlash if that project is not having impact.
Right.
And every day I speak all over the country, and I see thousands of Americans, white Americans, Latino Americans, Asian Americans, Black Americans, who are saying, I understand my country better, who are starting to really critique so much of the inequality that we accept. But now what happens next, though, I think is largely dependent upon us. Which version of America are we going to allow to move forward? We are in, as you know, an extremely polarized time, a time where people whose views seem antithetical to democracy are really pulling the levers of power to make it harder for us to vote, to make it harder for us to have a shared sense of civic obligation to each other. So I don't know what's going to happen next, but I fear, as I know you do, that we're ahead. We have some very dark times ahead unless we as Americans decide that we want a different country.
I don't wish to draw you into a debate with Donald Trump, but what do you say to people who say that you're trying to frame all of our history and society through race in some way that's damaging? I didn't hear that. When I first read what you wrote and subsequently the book, that's not how I saw it. I saw you adding more information to our corpus of history and knowledge about ourselves.
Well, it's fascinating to hear that argument from people who themselves are obsessed with race, right? These attacks on affirmative action, these attacks on DEI, the attacks on immigrants, these are all race obsessions, but they're pretending that it's in fact people like myself and the work that we produce that is divisive. We have to be honest about our history, and parts of our history are very ugly, but how can we possibly try to become the country of our highest ideals if we're not honest about what we were built upon? And if you actually read the project, it's actually the most patriotic thing I've ever read.
It's not angry. It's simply here's a piece of the story that is left out of our own narrative about ourselves.
Absolutely.
Why don't we have a more complete look at this thing? It doesn't come away as angry. It doesn't come away as mad at anyone. It doesn't come away as vengeful or divisive.
No, what it argues is that we have failed to live up to our ideals, but that Black Americans joined with other Americans to fight to try to make those ideals manifest. It actually is empowering. It says that we don't have to accept the society that we have, and that I actually think the highest calling of patriotism is not to say we can't ever critique our country, but to say that if our country is great, we have to work to make it so. That's true patriotism. Most of the people, though, who critique this project, who are trying to ban this history, it's clear they haven't read it.
Yes.
Or they haven't grappled seriously and sincerely with this ideal and argument.
You were the impetus for us starting the Van Book Club, and that's the point. Most of the people who critique most of these things haven't read them.
Absolutely.
They just got ideas about what they are. So you know what? This is your invitation. Read the 1619 Project. It's published. You can read it for yourself, and then you can be mad about it, or you can like it, or whatever. But at least you can be informed. Nicole, great to see you.